Hey guys, today I want to talk about some of the problems that we have in Destiny. A lot of this is in light of the recent layoffs. I wanted to just talk about the state of the game a little bit, which is kind of unusual for my channel, but hopefully you guys still like it. The main things I want to cover is the state of the PvE meta, and a lot of things surrounding the new episode or seasonal model and the time gating mainly behind it. So to start things off, I'll go ahead and talk about the seasonal model first. If you guys didn't know, they changed from using the seasons that they've been doing for many years in the past to now using something called episodes, which are pretty much just seasons except with more time gating now. And when I say that, I'm mostly talking about the weapons. Historically, we've had a weekly set of missions that you would do each week for the seasonal story, and this was mostly just boring quest stuff like going to lost sectors and holding E in various locations on patrol. And that has never been interesting, so it's not really a big deal to me that it isn't still. However, it is definitely a harping point when it is something I'm now actually required to do to unlock the weapon. Because in the past, in seasons, you could get all the weapons right away once you started getting the engrams for the season, which mostly would happen after just doing the first mission, which I think is fair enough. After that, you could unlock upgrades doing various things. For the most part, it was doing the seasonal activities or running the seasonal story. It kind of depended on the season. And this is still the case with episodes, however the actual weapons themselves are now being time gated behind this story. And on top of that, even when the time for the time gate passes, you still have to actually do the story to get access to the weapons, so they're not even just immediately available, you still have to run the extremely boring seasonal story. And this is something a lot of people get upset with me for saying because they think I'm referring to like the writing of the story or the lore behind it. I'm just talking about the gameplay. Going to various places, holding E, doing the seasonal activity again, picking flowers in the seasonal activity. I don't really think that's enjoyable content. And it kind of sucks when you have to play that in order to get access to the new weapons, especially if those weapons are powerful. A great example of this is the aberrant action that we just had. You have to do the story in order to get the weapon available to you at all. And you have to do even more to be able to actually focus it. Otherwise you can only get it from RNG drops. But I think overall, my biggest harp on the change to the episodes from seasons is that they're not really different in any way, except now we're just time gating the weapons instead of previously not time gating the weapons. Like, I really can't think of anything that episodes has done other than just time gate weapons. I understand that there are more weapons now, however, it's important to remember that in any seasonal weapon set, there's pretty much always filler garbage weapons, like the scout rifles or whatever. Rarely the scout rifle is good, for example, in a given seasonal set. And there's multiple examples of filler garbage in every seasonal set. For example, right now the pulse rifle, the scout rifle, almost every weapon other than the sidearm and the grenade launcher. And so that is why I don't really think having these extra weapons even is really adding any benefit to this, because if you ask me, I think the good weapons were going to be in anyway, and then they just added these filler garbage weapons that nobody really cares about as extra weapons to be able to time gate the entire set. And I know there's a lot of negativity in this, but I really do think that just reverting back to the seasonal system would be better, just because it's not really different than what we have now. There's just less time gating, which I think would make everybody happy. But this has been a general mindset thing I've kind of seen with Bungie, is that many of the activities feel like they're trying to force you to just have to play the game in certain places where a lot of us might not want to be playing, just to unlock something, and it kind of just feels like a chore to a lot of people, when it could be much more enjoyable if they got to play the content they wanted to get the thing that they were getting. And obviously having things set to specific activities makes sense, however in the sense of unlocking access to the seasonal weapons, I don't think that this should be the case. Historically, you could get seasonal engrams by doing pretty much any activity, and then you could just come back and use them to get seasonal weapons. It's not like this is Trials weapons where you should obviously have to play Trials to get Trials engrams. You've always been able to get seasonal engrams anywhere and then spend them on whatever you want. However, with the new episode system, you can no longer spend them on whatever you want, and I think that that is the biggest issue I have with episodes and overall time gating. I think the time gating of stuff like dungeons and other events and activities obviously makes sense. It's very good to have content drops throughout the season or episode. I think that that's a great thing, and I definitely don't mind that happening. However, I think to drip feed things like 2 weapons at a time for every other week is just completely over the top with the concept. So yeah, that's going to wrap up what I think there. Pretty much the TLDR is just, I don't think that 2 weapons should be something that's being time gated. And moving on, I just want to talk about the state of the PvE meta. I've seen a lot of people complaining about the PvP meta, but I also feel like that's pretty much always the case. There's always complaints about the PvP meta, and between that and the fact that I am definitely not as in tune with the PvP meta as I am the PvE meta, I'm going to choose not to talk about it. That being said, the biggest complaint I think I have about PvE as far as the meta goes right now is just the long-range DPS meta. As many of you know, Still Hunt was just recently nerfed for using Celestial with it, and the problem with that nerf is that it didn't change the meta at all. That's still the most effective setup for long-range DPS. However, what it did do is make it no longer possible to solo the Witness. So you have this nerf that basically took away the ability for people to do something that's really cool, which would be fair if it actually changed the meta to something else, maybe if they had buffed some other stuff alongside doing that. But basically, they just made the players a little bit weaker without actually changing the meta in any way whatsoever. So I think we pretty much only got the downsides of a nerf, which obviously makes something weaker and feel worse, but without any of the benefits that a nerf can bring, like changing the meta to something different. And adding on to this problem of classes not being fair right now, obviously hunters do have the unfair advantage of just having Celestial Still Hunt, but to make things even worse, Titans are in a state where they don't even have the means to keep up with a DPS meta where weapons are not class specific right now. So even if Still Hunt without Celestial was better than with Celestial, Titans would still be very weak in the DPS meta because they are just lacking DPS kit. The first thing I'll talk about is their damage supers. There are pretty much 3 damage supers on Titan. The first one is Thunder Crash, which has some viability issues because you basically have to interrupt yourself while you're shooting to do the super, fly into the boss, and then return to the damage spot before you start shooting again. You end up wasting a ton of time that you could have spent just shooting the boss instead. Another one is the Pyrogale's Solar Super using the Burning Maul. Basically, this super is the weakest of the bunch unless you have Burning Flames active, which adds a pretty serious requirement to it. And overall, it's very boss specific on what it even works on because it has to be able to stay on the boss for an extended period of time, and you also can't have multiple of them stack at the same time. Then finally, the best Titan super by far is the Twilight Arsenal. However, it unfortunately doesn't do enough damage to really make up for the extremely long cast time. Basically, the time it takes to throw just one of the axes in Twilight Arsenal is pretty much the amount of time it takes to pop a Needle Storm or a Nova Bomb, or to pop a Golden Gun and shoot it, or just to throw any other comparable one-off super. However, it doesn't do the same amount of damage as these one-off supers in its entire damage set. Even when you throw all 3 axes, it still does less damage than Nova Bomb. And this is all while having 3 times longer cast duration. So it's literally cutting the DPS in 1/3 because it takes so long to throw, and it does similar damage to some weaker supers and less damage than the top super right now, being Nova Bomb. On top of this damage super problem that Titans have, they also have a complete lack of ways to reload their weapons. Hunters by far have the best reloading setups right now with things like Marksman's Dodge, and even having stuff like the Spirit of Dragon, which is giving you the entire effect of Dragon Shadow, which reloads all 3 of your weapons and grants you an insane handling boost. And on the Spear version only takes up half of an exotic. But even without exotics, Hunters still have very good reload setups, having a very short cooldown dodge that can reload a weapon. Warlocks also have some decent reload options. They by far make the best use of Facet of Command on Prismatic. Even though that was nerfed heavily, they still are able to use it pretty decently with stuff like their Transcendent Grenade or Stasis turrets. And Warlocks also have access to the strongest reload exotic in the game, being Rain of Fire. However, Titans, pretty much the only reload buff that you can get on Titans is going to be stuff like Actium War Rig, which doesn't apply to any relevant DPS weapons, and it only applies to weapons that are pretty much doomed to never be relevant for DPS because of what they are. And they have access to Rally Barricades, which only grant a reload speed bonus. They don't automatically reload your weapons anymore. I think the easiest fix to the solution right away is to just make Rally Barricade have auto reloads on crouch, but just give it the cooldown that many other reload things have. For example, even Rain of Fire technically has a 4-second cooldown, so if there was a 4-second cooldown, it would be pretty reasonable. Lastly, there are some things going on in the roam meta that I don't think are amazing, but I also don't think are the end of the world. Pretty much in the roam meta, and also the melee damage meta for that matter, Hunters are also the best in this regard, with basically no competition coming from the other classes at this point. Hunters are the new kings of grapple DPS, having access to the stylish Executioner broken interaction that can do 1.6 million in a single melee. Even without having stylish, it's still very strong, and overall just the chance of having even one stylish hit completely makes up for Banner of War throughout the entire damage phase on Titan. Then when you mix in that hunters also have way better survivability than the other classes, it gets kind of crazy. If we look at something like the Grandmaster's meta, we can see that Hunter has access to the Spirit of Cedar-Acne, which is absolutely insane as far as survivability. Basically, Hunters and Grandmasters can stack so many healing verbs that they become practically invincible. You can literally have Woven Mail, Restoration, Invisibility, and then when you add in stuff like your Resilience and your Resistance mods, and maybe even some weapons like the Arc Conductor Ergo Sum, you get an absolutely ridiculous setup that just tanks like 90% of damage and then instantly heals you. All that on top of also being able to go invisible on pretty much every kill because it's so easy to apply any sort of debuff on the Hunter kit. Warlocks also have a decent setup here, being able to stack Devour on top of whatever they have with Facet of Purpose. However, it is clearly a lot less broken in that regard, as Devour is not the best healing verb in the game, although it is decent. Whereas Titans are left with pretty much nothing as far as getting healing verbs. They have Knockout for like restoring half their health on a melee kill while the perk happens to be active. However, it's a lot harder to proc than something like Devour is on Warlock or Invisibility is on Hunter, and the benefit is also smaller. So they're pretty much left only with Facet of Purpose, and are required to use something like Spirit of Assassin to stay alive on their class item. That being said, Titans actually bring a lot of damage to GMs in the form of the Consecration setup, so I think it's a little bit more balanced in that regard, where they bring by far the best overall damage neutrally to Grandmasters, however they have less health. It's kind of ironic that Titans have ended up becoming the glass cannon for Grandmasters, and then Hunters are the tanky beasts that can just handle anything. But at least there's a level of balance between the two, so I don't really hate that. I'd love to know what you guys think about that in the comments below. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for the video. I pretty much just wanted to yap about how I feel about some things going on in the game, and hopefully somebody can see this and we can give some more constructive feedback to Bungie to make the game that we all love a little bit better.